The rain hammered against our kitchen window like bullets against armor, each drop exploding in a symphony of betrayal I didn't yet understand. I stood in the doorway, my work boots still caked with mud from the construction site, watching my wife of 15 years pour 2 glasses of our best Cabernet with the kind of careful precision she usually reserved for her quarterly reports. "Will, honey, you look exhausted," Leah said, turning toward me with a smile that seemed painted on with the same fake sweetness she used at office parties. Her auburn hair was perfectly styled, despite it being nearly 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and she wore that black silk blouse I'd bought her for our anniversary last year, the one she claimed was too nice for regular occasions. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Something was wrong. Leah never greeted me with wine and smiles after my 12-hour shifts. Usually, she'd be upstairs in her home office, tapping away at her laptop, managing projects for the regional tech firm that had consumed her soul over the past 3 years. The transformation from the woman who used to wait up for me with leftover dinner and genuine conversation had been so gradual I'd almost convinced myself it was normal. "To us, forever," she said, raising her glass with theatrical flourish. My gut twisted like a rusty knife. Leah never made toasts. She barely acknowledged our wedding anniversary anymore, let alone celebrated random Tuesday nights with expensive wine and declarations of eternal love. My construction supervisor instincts, honed by 15 years of spotting structural problems before they became disasters, screamed at me, "This is a trap." "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, accepting the glass she offered. The wine looked darker than usual, almost black in the kitchen's fluorescent light. "You know what? Let me wash my hands first. I'm covered in concrete dust." I set my glass on the counter and moved toward the sink, but as I passed behind her, I smoothly switched our glasses. 20 years of handling tools and materials had given me steady hands and quick reflexes. Leah was too busy admiring her manicure to notice. "To us, forever," I echoed, raising what had been her glass. We drank. The wine tasted bitter, with an underlying chemical tang that made my tongue feel slightly numb. I forced myself to swallow and smile, watching Leah over the rim of my glass. She drained hers quickly, like someone taking medicine. "How was your day?" I asked, settling into my usual chair at our kitchen table. The normalcy of the question felt surreal, given the circumstances. "Oh, the usual chaos. Grant's been pushing everyone hard on the Morrison project. Sometimes I think that man expects miracles." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "What about you? How's the Henderson site coming along?" "Ahead of schedule, actually. Eddie's crew finished the foundation work this morning." I kept my voice casual while studying her face. "Who's Grant again? I don't think you've mentioned him before." A flush crept up her neck. "Grant Bishop. He's the new innovation director. Started about 6 months ago. Very driven, very intense." 20 minutes later, Leah doubled over at the sink, clutching her stomach. The wine glass shattered against the ceramic as it fell from her trembling fingers. "Oh, God, Will, something's wrong. My stomach feels like it's on fire, and I can't think straight." I was already reaching for my phone, dialing 911 with one hand while supporting her with the other. "It's okay, honey. Maybe it was something you ate. Let's get you to the hospital." The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, their efficient movements and clinical questions filling our kitchen with controlled chaos. As they loaded Leah onto the stretcher, her purse fell open, spilling its contents across our hardwood floor. Her phone skittered under the table, its screen lighting up with an incoming text message. I rode in the ambulance, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of consciousness. The EMT said her symptoms suggested food poisoning or possibly an adverse reaction to medication. They'd know more after blood tests. At the hospital, while Leah was being examined, I retrieved her phone from my jacket pocket. She'd dropped it during the chaos, and I'd automatically picked it up along with her scattered belongings. The screen was still unlocked, showing that unread text message. The sender was listed as Bishop. "Can't wait for tomorrow night. Your husband will never know. Delete this." My hands shook as I scrolled through their conversation history. Months of messages, each one a dagger through 15 years of marriage. Photos of Leah in lingerie I'd never seen. Videos of her in locations I didn't recognize. A lakeside house with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture that screamed money. The most recent exchange from earlier that evening made my blood freeze. Leah: "It's done. He'll be out of the picture by morning." Bishop: "You're sure about the dosage? We can't afford mistakes." Leah: "Trust me. By tomorrow, I'll be a grieving widow, and we can finally be together." Bishop: "I love you. See you at the lake house tomorrow to celebrate." I sat in that sterile hospital waiting room, surrounded by the antiseptic smell of industrial cleaning products and the quiet desperation of other people's emergencies, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The man who'd spent 15 years building a life with Leah Mercer, who'd trusted her with his heart and his future, died in that moment. What remained was someone colder, sharper, and infinitely more dangerous. When the doctor emerged to tell me Leah had been poisoned, likely with a sedative that could have been fatal in a larger dose, I played the part of the concerned husband perfectly. I asked all the right questions, expressed appropriate shock and worry, and demanded they call the police to investigate. But inside, I was already planning. Leah had wanted to play games with poison and betrayal. She'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent my entire adult life solving problems, building structures that could withstand any storm. Now I was going to build something special just for her, a revenge so complete and devastating that she'd spend the rest of her life wishing she'd never heard the name Grant Bishop. As I sat beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep off the effects of her own murder weapon, I made a silent promise. She'd toasted to us forever tonight. Before I was finished, she'd understand exactly what forever meant. The game was on. I returned home at 3 a.m. to find our house exactly as we'd left it. Wine glasses still on the counter, Leah's purse contents scattered across the floor, the lingering smell of paramedics and panic in the air. But now I saw everything differently. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a crime scene, and I was both detective and victim. The first thing I did was photograph everything with my phone, the wine bottle, the glasses, the spilled contents of Leah's purse. Then I carefully collected the broken glass from her wine glass and stored it in a Ziploc bag. If she'd put something in that wine, there might be residue. Next, I headed to Leah's home office, her sanctuary that I'd been politely discouraged from entering for the past 2 years. It's just work stuff, honey. Boring spreadsheets and client files. The lock was a simple privacy knob that yielded to a credit card in under 30 seconds. Her laptop was still open, displaying her email inbox. I felt a moment of guilt about invading her privacy, then remembered the text messages on her phone and pushed forward. The guilt died completely when I found the folder labeled Project Forever buried in her documents. Inside were dozens of photos and videos that painted a picture of betrayal so complete it took my breath away. Leah and Grant Bishop in his lakeside house, in hotel rooms, in what looked like his office after hours. The timestamps went back 8 months, 8 months of lies, 8 months of working late and client dinners and team-building exercises. But the photos were just the beginning. There were bank statements showing regular transfers from our joint account to a new account I'd never seen. $12,000 over 6 months, money that was supposed to be going toward our vacation fund and home improvements. There were apartment listings in Portland, 2 hours away, with notes in Leah's handwriting about perfect for a fresh start. The worst part was a document titled Insurance Information that detailed my life insurance policy, the one we'd taken out when we bought the house, the one I'd forgotten about years ago, $500,000, with Leah as the sole beneficiary. Someone had printed out the claims process and highlighted the sections about death certificates and payout timelines. I sat in her chair, staring at the evidence of my wife's plan to murder me for money and another man, and felt something cold and calculating settle into my chest. This wasn't just an affair. This was premeditated murder, and I'd only survived because of a lucky glass switch and my paranoid instincts. My phone buzzed with a text from Leah. "Feeling better? Doctor says I can come home in the morning. Thank you for taking care of me. I love you." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Love you too. Can't wait to have you home." The lie came easily. I was learning. By the time the sun rose, I'd documented everything in Leah's office and returned it to exactly how I'd found it. I'd also made copies of every incriminating file and photo, storing them on a flash drive I hid in my workshop. Then I drove to the construction site, where I knew I'd find Eddie Mallory already working, despite the early hour. Eddie had been my foreman for 7 years, and my friend for longer than that. He was a man's man in the best sense. Loyal, straightforward, and absolutely lethal when someone threatened people he cared about. He was also smart enough to help me think through what came next. "You look like hell," Eddie said as I approached his trailer. He was reviewing blueprints with a cup of coffee that could probably strip paint. "Everything okay with Leah?" "That's what I need to talk to you about," I said, closing the trailer door behind me. "And Eddie, this conversation never happened." I told him everything, the wine, the hospital, the files I'd found. Eddie's expression grew darker with each revelation, his knuckles white around his coffee cup. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Jesus, Will, she really tried to kill you. She really did. And if I hadn't switched those glasses, you'd be dead, and she'd be playing the grieving widow while she ran off with her boyfriend." Eddie stood up and paced the small trailer. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want justice, but not the kind that comes from cops and courts. She tried to murder me, Eddie. The legal system might not even be able to prove it, and even if they could, she'd probably get a plea deal and be out in a few years. That's not good enough." Eddie grinned, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to destroy her. I want to take away everything she values, her reputation, her job, her boyfriend, her future. I want her to lose everything the same way I lost everything when I found out what she really was." "Count me in," Eddie said without hesitation. "What do you need?" We spent the next hour planning. Eddie would help me gather more information about Grant Bishop while I played the devoted husband and kept Leah from getting suspicious. We'd take our time, be methodical, and make sure that when we struck, it would be devastating and complete. I picked Leah up from the hospital at noon, playing my role perfectly. I brought her flowers, fussed over her comfort, and listened sympathetically as she spun lies about how frightening the whole experience had been. "The doctor said it might have been something I ate," she said as we drove home. "Maybe that sushi from yesterday's lunch meeting." "Maybe," I agreed, knowing full well she'd been home all day yesterday according to the timestamps on her computer files. "The important thing is that you're okay." That afternoon, while Leah rested, I drove to the address I'd found for Grant Bishop. The lakeside house was everything the photos had suggested: modern, expensive, and isolated. Perfect for secret affairs and murder planning. I didn't approach the house, just observed from the road, noting the layout, the security system, the expensive cars in the driveway. My phone rang as I was taking photos. "Eddie." "I found our boy," he said. "Grant Bishop, 38, divorced 2 years ago. His ex-wife lives in town, Sophie Carter, works at the library. Word is, she's not too happy about how the marriage ended." "Cheating?" "Among other things. Apparently he cleaned out their joint accounts and left her with all the debt. Sound familiar?" It sounded very familiar. "Think she'd be willing to talk?" "Only one way to find out. Library closes at 6. Want to pay her a visit?" Sophie Carter was a small woman with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. When Eddie and I introduced ourselves and explained why we were there, her expression shifted from confusion to interest to something that looked like vindication. "So he's doing it again," she said, leading us to a quiet corner of the library. I wondered how long it would take. "He's done this before?" I asked. "Grant has a pattern. He finds married women with money and security, seduces them, convinces them to leave their husbands, then takes everything he can and moves on to the next victim. I was just stupid enough to marry him first." Sophie told us everything: Grant's gambling debts, his history of fraud at previous jobs, his expensive tastes and complete lack of conscience. She also told us about his current situation. He was deeply in debt again, facing pressure from some very unpleasant creditors, and desperately needed money. "That's why he's pushing your wife to move so fast," Sophie explained. "He needs her life insurance money to pay off his debts, and he needs it soon. I'd guess he's got maybe a month before his creditors get tired of waiting." The timeline made sense. The increasing pressure on Leah to take care of the problem, the detailed insurance information, the rushed planning. Grant Bishop wasn't just a cheating boyfriend, he was a predator who'd convinced my wife to commit murder to solve his financial problems. "There's something else," Sophie said as we prepared to leave. "Grant's not as smart as he thinks he is. He keeps detailed records of everything: photos, financial information, communications with his victims. He thinks it gives him leverage, but it's really just evidence. If you could get access to his computer." "Where does he keep it?" Eddie asked. "Home office, second floor of the lake house. He's usually at work until 7, and he goes to the gym every Tuesday and Thursday from 8 to 10. Today was Tuesday. Eddie and I looked at each other. We had a window of opportunity, and we had someone who knew exactly where to find the evidence we needed. "Sophie," I said carefully, "how would you feel about helping us make sure Grant Bishop never hurts another family?" Her smile was sharp as a blade. "I thought you'd never ask." 2 hours later, we were parked outside Grant's lake house, watching him drive away in his expensive Tesla. Sophie had provided detailed layouts of the house and the location of his home office. Eddie had provided lockpicks and a small camera to document everything we found. Breaking into the house felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than my actual life. But as we made our way to Grant's office and I saw the evidence of his systematic destruction of families, photos of multiple women, financial records showing repeated patterns of theft and fraud, detailed plans for insurance scams, I felt my resolve harden into something unbreakable. Grant Bishop had turned my wife into a would-be murderer. Now it was time to return the favor. Grant Bishop's home office was a shrine to his own arrogance. The walls were covered with expensive diplomas, awards from various tech companies, and photographs of him with people who looked important. His desk was a massive piece of polished mahogany that probably cost more than most people's cars, and his computer setup looked like something from a NASA control room. But it was the filing cabinet in the corner that held the real treasures. Jesus Christ, Eddie muttered as we went through folder after folder of evidence. This guy's a serial killer, except instead of bodies, he collects ruined lives. Each folder was labeled with a woman's name and contained detailed information about her marriage, finances, and vulnerabilities. There were at least 8 folders, going back 5 years. Photos, bank statements, insurance policies, even psychological profiles noting things like responds well to flattery about her intelligence and insecure about aging, emphasize youthful appearance. Leah's folder was the thickest, labeled Project Forever, just like the files on her computer. Grant had been studying my wife like a lab specimen, documenting her routines, her weaknesses, her growing dissatisfaction with our marriage. There were notes about my work schedule, our financial situation, and detailed plans for how to manipulate Leah into believing murder was her only option for happiness. "Look at this," Sophie said, pointing to a document near the back of Leah's folder. "He's got a timeline. Your accident was supposed to happen next week during your fishing trip to Moosehead Lake." I stared at the plan, written in Grant's neat handwriting. A staged drowning, with Leah as the grieving widow who'd been conveniently visiting her sister in Boston when it happened. They'd even researched the lake's currents and the average time it took for bodies to surface. "They've thought of everything," I said, photographing each page with my phone, except for the possibility that I might fight back. We spent 2 hours documenting everything in Grant's office, copying files, photographing evidence, and building a comprehensive picture of his operation. By the time we finished, we had enough evidence to put him away for decades, if we decided to go the legal route. But I had something else in mind. "Eddie, how do you feel about a little automotive maintenance?" Grant's Tesla was parked in the attached garage, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a symbol of everything he'd stolen from his victims. Eddie grinned as he opened his toolbox. "I've always wanted to work on one of these fancy electric cars. We didn't damage anything permanently. I wasn't interested in creating actual safety hazards. But we did make some adjustments." Eddie let the air out of all 4 tires and loosened the valve caps so they'd continue leaking slowly. I disconnected the charging cable and hid it in the garage rafters. We also used car soap to write "cheater" across the hood in large, clear letters that would be visible from 50 yards away. The piece de resistance was Eddie's idea. He found a bag of sugar in Grant's kitchen and sprinkled it around the car, not in the gas tank, which was a myth anyway, but on the ground nearby where it would create the impression of sabotage without actually causing damage. "He'll spend hours trying to figure out what we actually did to the engine," Eddie chuckled as we cleaned up our tools. "Meanwhile, his biggest problem will be 4 flat tires and a bruised ego." We were just finishing when headlights swept across the garage windows. Grant was home early. "Back door," Sophie whispered, leading us through the kitchen toward the rear of the house. But we were too late. The front door opened just as we reached the kitchen, and Grant's voice echoed through the house. "What the hell?" He'd obviously seen his car. Eddie and I exchanged glances, and I made a decision that probably wasn't smart, but felt absolutely necessary. "You two get out of here," I told Eddie and Sophie. "I want to have a conversation with our friend." "Will, that's not—" Eddie started. "Go. This is something I need to do." They slipped out the back door just as Grant stormed into the kitchen, his face red with rage. He was smaller than I'd expected, maybe 5'10", and soft around the middle, with the kind of pale complexion that suggested too much time indoors. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his perfectly styled hair was disheveled from running his hands through it. "Who are you, and what did you do to my car?" "I'm Will Mercer," I said calmly, settling into one of his kitchen chairs like I owned the place. "Leah's husband. You know, the guy you've been planning to murder?" The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do, Grant. Can I call you Grant? I feel like we know each other pretty well after reading through all your files upstairs. Very thorough work, by the way. I especially enjoyed the timeline for my drowning accident." He backed toward the counter, his eyes darting toward what I assumed was a knife block. "You're insane. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," I said, pulling out my phone and setting it on his kitchen table. "While you're at it, explain to them why you have detailed insurance information for 8 different married women, including plans to murder their husbands. I'm sure they'll find that very interesting." Grant's hand froze halfway to his phone. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something very clearly. You picked the wrong family to destroy. You convinced my wife to try to poison me, you planned to steal everything I've worked for my entire life, and you thought you were smart enough to get away with it. I stood up slowly, keeping my movements casual and non-threatening. I wasn't here to hurt him physically. That would make me no better than him, but I wanted him to understand exactly what he was dealing with. Here's what's going to happen, Grant. You're going to stay away from my wife. You're going to end whatever sick game you've been playing, and you're going to find a new town to live in, because this one isn't big enough for both of us anymore. You can't threaten me, he said, but his voice shook. I'll tell Leah you were here. I'll tell her you broke into my house. Feel free, but you might want to think about what else I might tell her, like how I'm wife number 8 in your little collection, or how you've been planning to murder me since the day you met her. Think she'll still find you charming when she realizes she's just another mark in your con game? I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. Oh, and Grant, you might want to get your car looked at. I hear Teslas can be very unreliable. I left him standing in his kitchen, shaking with rage and fear, and drove home with a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in months. The game was officially on, and I just made the first move. But when I got home, I found Leah waiting for me in the living room, and the expression on her face told me the game was about to get a lot more complicated. We need to talk, she said. Leah was sitting on our couch with her laptop open, her face illuminated by the screen's glow in our darkened living room. She'd changed out of the hospital clothes into jeans and a sweater, but she still looked pale and shaken from her poisoning ordeal. The poisoning she'd intended for me. Where were you tonight, Will? I hung my jacket on the coat rack and tried to read her expression. Suspicious, angry, scared. After 15 years of marriage, I should have been able to tell, but the woman sitting on our couch felt like a stranger. I went for a drive after I got you settled. Needed to clear my head after everything that happened last night. Why? Grant called me. He said someone broke into his house and vandalized his car. He thinks it might have been you. I sat down in my recliner, the same spot where I'd watched countless football games and movies with the woman who tried to murder me less than 24 hours ago. That's interesting. Why would he think I'd do something like that? Don't play games with me, Will. I know you know about us. The admission hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. Part of me wanted to explode, to scream at her about the betrayal and the poison and the insurance money. But I'd learned something important tonight. Information was power, and I had more of it than she realized. How long? I asked quietly. 8 months. She closed the laptop and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd come home. I didn't plan for it to happen, Will. We just connected. He understands me in ways you never have. And the poison? Did he understand you enough to help you plan my murder? Her face went white. What are you talking about? The wine last night, Leah. The wine you drugged, expecting me to drink it, except I switched our glasses and you got a taste of your own medicine instead. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. You're paranoid. I would never... I read the text messages on your phone while you were unconscious. It's done. He'll be out of the picture by morning. Ring any bells? Leah spun around, her eyes wide with panic. You went through my phone? I went through everything. Your computer, your files, your secret bank account. I know about the apartment in Portland, the money you've been stealing from our joint account, even the detailed research you did on my life insurance policy. Very thorough work, by the way. Grant trained you well. She sank back onto the couch like her strings had been cut. Will, I can explain. Explain what? How you fell in love with a con man who's done this exact same thing to at least 7 other women. How you decided murder was easier than divorce. How you were planning to watch me drown next week at Moosehead Lake while you had an alibi in Boston. Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. By the time I finished, she was crying, not the pretty, delicate tears she used when she wanted sympathy, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. He said you'd never give me a divorce, she whispered. He said you'd take everything, leave me with nothing. He said it was the only way we could be together. And you believed him? I love him, Will. I know that sounds horrible after everything, but I do. He makes me feel alive again, like I matter. When was the last time you looked at me the way he does? When was the last time you told me I was beautiful or smart or important? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Our marriage had become comfortable, routine, predictable. I'd taken her for granted the same way she'd taken me for granted, but that didn't justify attempted murder. So, instead of talking to me about it, instead of suggesting counseling or even just asking for a divorce, you decided to poison me? It wasn't supposed to be like that. The plan was different. The plan was to make it look like an accident so you could collect the insurance money and run away with your boyfriend. Don't try to pretty it up now, Leah. You tried to murder me for money. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 15 years of marriage collapsing around us. Finally, Leah wiped her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been hope. What happens now? Now? Now we see how this plays out. Because here's the thing, Leah. I'm not going to make this easy for either of you. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the offices of Peterson, Walsh & Associates, the best law firm in town. Margaret Walsh was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on handling messy divorces for wealthy clients. She listened to my story without interruption, occasionally taking notes, her expression growing more interested with each detail. "You have documentation of all this?" she asked when I finished. I handed her a flash drive containing copies of everything I'd found in Leah's computer and Grant's office. Photos, financial records, text messages, insurance documents, even their murder timeline. Everything. She plugged the drive into her computer and spent 20 minutes reviewing the files. When she looked up, she was smiling like a shark who just smelled blood in the water. "Mr. Mercer, this is the most comprehensive evidence package I've seen in 20 years of practice. Your wife and her boyfriend have handed us everything we need to destroy them both, legally and financially. What are my options? Criminal charges for attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy, civil suits for theft, emotional distress, and breach of fiduciary duty. Divorce proceedings where you'll get everything and she'll get nothing. We can also go after Mr. Bishop for alienation of affection and conspiracy to commit murder." It was everything I'd hoped for, complete legal vindication. But as I sat in Margaret's office, surrounded by law books and the smell of leather and power, I realized it wasn't enough. Legal justice was slow, uncertain, and ultimately unsatisfying. What I wanted was something more immediate and personal. "I want to file for divorce," I said, "but I want to handle the rest of it myself." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's not advisable, Mr. Mercer. With evidence like this, we could—" "I know what you could do, but this isn't about money or legal victories. This is about making sure they understand exactly what they've lost." That afternoon, I put Phase 2 of my plan into motion. Our town's annual Founders' Day festival was scheduled for the weekend, and everyone would be there, including all of Leah's coworkers, our friends and neighbors, and the social circle she'd worked so hard to impress over the years. I spent the rest of the week preparing. Eddie helped me create a slideshow of photos and documents from Grant's files, focusing on the evidence of his serial predation and the details of their murder plot. Sophie provided additional information about Grant's financial situation and his history of destroying families. By Friday night, we had everything ready. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Perfect weather for the festival. Leah had already left for her volunteer shift at the information booth. She'd been organizing the festival for 3 years, and it was one of her proudest accomplishments. She'd even convinced Grant to attend as her guest, introducing him to our friends and neighbors as a colleague from work. I arrived at the festival around noon, carrying a laptop bag and wearing my best smile. The town square was packed with families, food vendors, and booths selling everything from handmade crafts to political campaign buttons. A small stage had been set up for announcements and presentations, with a large screen for displaying photos and videos. I found Leah at the information booth, looking radiant in a sundress I'd bought her for last year's festival. Grant was beside her, playing the part of the charming boyfriend, shaking hands and making small talk with people who had no idea what he really was. "Will." Leah's smile was forced but convincing. "I'm so glad you came. Everyone, this is my husband, Will. Will, this is Grant Bishop from my office." Grant extended his hand with practiced confidence. "Nice to finally meet you, Will. Leah's told me so much about you." I shook his hand, squeezing just hard enough to make him uncomfortable. "I'm sure she has. All good things, I hope?" "Of course," he said, but his eyes were wary. I spent the next hour mingling, greeting friends and neighbors, playing the part of the supportive husband, but I was also positioning myself, making sure I knew where all the key players were when the show started. At 2 o'clock, I approached the volunteer running the presentation system. "Hi, I'm Will Mercer. My wife Leah asked me to set up a special presentation for the festival. Something about community awareness?" The volunteer, an elderly man named Frank, who'd known me for years, nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, Will. Leah mentioned something about that. Just plug in your laptop and you're all set." I connected my computer to the system and opened the slideshow Eddie and I had prepared. The first slide was innocuous enough. Community safety awareness, protecting our families from predators. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying across the crowded square. "If I could have your attention for just a few minutes, I'd like to share some important information about protecting our community from a dangerous individual who's been operating in our area. The crowd turned toward the stage, curious. I could see Leah near the information booth, her face confused but not yet alarmed. Grant was beside her, looking slightly annoyed at the interruption. "This man," I said, clicking to the next slide, "is Grant Bishop. He's been systematically targeting married women in our community, seducing them, stealing their money, and convincing them to murder their husbands for insurance money." The crowd went silent. Grant's face turned white as his photo filled the screen, a professional headshot that made him look respectable and trustworthy. Over the past 5 years, he's destroyed at least 8 families using the same pattern. He studies his victims, identifies their vulnerabilities, and manipulates them into believing their husbands are obstacles to their happiness. I clicked through the slides, showing evidence from Grant's files, photos of his previous victims, financial records showing his pattern of theft. The crowd was transfixed, shocked murmurs rippling through the square. Most recently, he convinced my wife, Leah Mercer, to attempt to poison me so they could collect my life insurance money and start a new life together. The murmurs became gasps. I could see Leah pushing through the crowd toward the stage, her face a mask of horror and rage. Grant was trying to slip away, but people were already recognizing him, pointing and staring. "This is the timeline they created for my murder," I said, displaying Grant's handwritten plan. "A staged drowning accident at Moosehead Lake, scheduled for next week while Leah had an alibi in Boston." Leah reached the stage and tried to grab the microphone. "Will, stop this. You're destroying everything." "Everything was already destroyed, Leah. I'm just making sure everyone knows who did it." Grant finally reached us, his face purple with rage. "You can't do this. This is slander. I'll sue you for everything you have." "With what money?" I asked, clicking to a slide showing his debts and financial records. "According to these documents, you owe over $200,000 to various creditors, including some very unpleasant people who don't accept payment plans." The crowd was getting ugly now, angry voices calling out questions and accusations. Someone shouted, "Call the police?" Others were taking photos and videos with their phones. In the age of social media, Grant and Leah's humiliation would be permanent and far-reaching. "This presentation is available online," I announced, along with all the supporting documentation. I encourage everyone to share it with friends and family in other communities. Men like Grant Bishop rely on being able to move from town to town, finding new victims who don't know their history. Grant made a desperate lunge for my laptop, trying to stop the presentation. I stepped aside and he stumbled, falling off the small stage into the crowd. Several men, including Eddie, who'd appeared from nowhere, helped him back to his feet, not gently. "I think it's time for you to leave," Eddie said quietly, but his voice carried in the sudden silence. "This town isn't safe for you anymore." Grant looked around at the hostile faces surrounding him, then back at Leah, who was crying and trying to hide behind her hands. "This isn't over," he said to me. "Yes, it is," I replied. "It's been over since the moment you decided to target my family. You just didn't know it yet." He pushed through the crowd and disappeared, leaving Leah alone on the stage with me and 500 of our closest friends and neighbors. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "How could you do this to me?" "I didn't do this to you, Leah. You did it to yourself. I just made sure everyone knew the truth." The festival continued around us, but the mood had changed completely. People avoided Leah, conversation stopped when she approached, and I could see her carefully constructed social world crumbling in real time. But I wasn't finished yet. The public humiliation was just the beginning. The week following the festival was a masterpiece of controlled destruction. Grant had fled town immediately after his public exposure, but not before I'd made sure his employer, his creditors, and his new neighbors all received copies of the evidence against him. Leah tried to return to work on Monday, but by Tuesday she was on administrative leave pending an investigation into her relationship with Grant and the potential security breach it represented. She'd been staying at her sister's house since the festival, but she called me Wednesday night, her voice hollow and desperate. "Will, we need to talk. Please. I know I messed up, but maybe we can work something out." "What kind of something?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. "Grant's gone. He left town without even saying goodbye, took what money he had, and disappeared. I think you were right about him. About everything." It was exactly what I'd expected. Con men like Grant Bishop were predators, not lovers. The moment his scam fell apart and his victims became liabilities instead of assets, he'd abandon them without a second thought. Leah was finally learning what it felt like to be disposable. "I'm sorry, Will. I'm so sorry. I know I can't undo what I did, but maybe we can find a way forward. I'll do anything to make this right. Meet me tomorrow night at the Riverside Motel on Route 9, Room 12. We'll talk." The Riverside Motel was exactly the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen, run down, discreet, and cheap. It was also perfect for what I had planned. I arrived early and prepared the room with Eddie's help. We'd rented it for the week under a fake name, giving us time to set up our surprise. Hidden cameras in multiple locations, recording equipment, and a few special touches that would make the evening memorable. Eddie had outdone himself with the preparations. The air conditioning had been sabotaged to blow hot air instead of cool, making the already stuffy room unbearable. The sheets had been treated with itching powder, not enough to cause real harm, but sufficient to make anyone who touched them extremely uncomfortable. And the piece de resistance, a dead fish hidden in the air vent, which would slowly fill the room with an increasingly horrible smell as the evening progressed. "You sure about this?" Eddie asked as we finished the setup. "Seems like you've already won. She's lost her job, her boyfriend, her reputation. Why keep pushing?" "Because she tried to murder me, Eddie. She looked me in the eye for months while planning my death. A little social embarrassment and a failed relationship isn't enough payback for that." "Fair enough. What's the plan?" I explained what I had in mind, and Eddie's grin grew wider with each detail. "You're a vindictive bastard, Will Mercer. I like that about you." Leah arrived at 8 o'clock exactly, looking nervous and hopeful. She'd dressed carefully, not seductively, but in the kind of outfit designed to remind me of happier times. A blue dress I'd complimented years ago, the perfume she'd worn on our first date, her hair styled the way I'd always liked it. "Thank you for coming," she said as I let her into the room. "I wasn't sure you would." I said we'd talk. I keep my promises, unlike some people. She flinched but didn't respond to the barb. The room was already getting warm, and I could see her starting to sweat slightly. The smell from the air vent wasn't noticeable yet, but it would be soon. "Will, I know you hate me right now, and I understand why. What I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you, not really. Grant, he made me believe things that weren't true. He convinced me that you didn't care about me anymore, that you'd be happier without me. So you decided to poison me." I wasn't thinking clearly. He had this way of making everything seem logical, like it was the only solution. I see now that he was manipulating me, using my insecurities against me. She sat down on the bed, then immediately stood up again, scratching at her arms. "Is it hot in here?" "A little. Old building, bad air conditioning. You were saying?" "I was saying that I made a terrible mistake. The worst mistake of my life. But maybe if we could find a way to forgive each other, we could start over. Go to counseling, rebuild our trust, become the couple we used to be." The itching was getting worse, and the smell was starting to become noticeable, a subtle but growing stench that made the hot, stuffy room even more unpleasant. Leah kept shifting uncomfortably, scratching at her arms and neck. "You want to start over?" I asked. "Just like that? You try to murder me, steal our money, plan to run away with another man, and now you want to kiss and make up?" I know it sounds crazy, but yes. Will, you're the only real thing in my life. Everything with Grant was a fantasy, a stupid dream that turned into a nightmare. You're my husband, my partner, my best friend. At least, you were. She was crying now, real tears this time, not the manipulative kind she'd used during our marriage when she wanted something. The combination of heat, itching, and growing stench was making her miserable, but she was pushing through it, desperate to make her case. "What about the insurance money?" I asked. "The apartment in Portland? The new life you were planning?" "I'll give it all back. The money? Everything. I just want my life back, Will. I want us back." The smell was becoming impossible to ignore now, a nauseating stench that filled the small room. Leah was scratching constantly, her face flushed from the heat, sweat staining her carefully chosen dress. "This place smells awful," she said, covering her nose with her hand. "Can we go somewhere else to talk?" "No, I think this is the perfect place for this conversation. You see, Leah, I have a confession to make. I didn't bring you here to reconcile. I brought you here to show you something." I pulled out my phone and opened the recording app, showing her that I'd been recording our entire conversation. "I wanted to get your confession on record. The admission that you tried to poison me, that Grant manipulated you, that you stole our money. Very helpful for the divorce proceedings." Her face went white. "You're recording this?" "I'm recording everything. Video too, actually." I pointed to the hidden cameras Eddie and I had installed. "Smile for the camera, Leah. You're going to be famous." She stood up abruptly, swaying slightly from the heat and stress. "You bastard. This was all a setup." "Just like the wine you gave me was a setup. How does it feel to be on the receiving end?" She tried to leave, but I was blocking the door. "Let me out, Will. This is kidnapping." "This is justice. You tried to murder me in our kitchen, and I'm exposing you in a seedy motel room. Seems appropriate, don't you think? The smell was overwhelming now, and Leah was scratching so hard she was drawing blood. The heat had turned her carefully styled hair into a sweaty mess, and her makeup was running down her face in black streaks. "Please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Just let me go." "Not yet. We're not finished." I opened the door and stepped outside, revealing the crowd that had gathered in the motel parking lot. Eddie had spread the word about tonight's show, and it seemed like half the town had come to watch Leah's final humiliation. Mrs. Carmody was there with her phone out, live streaming to Facebook. Sophie Carter was in the front row, smiling with satisfaction. Even some of Leah's former coworkers had shown up to see how far she'd fallen. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, "I present to you Leah Mercer, attempted murderer and adulteress. She's been confessing her crimes for the past hour, and I thought you might like to hear what she had to say." I played back portions of our recorded conversation, her voice clear and damning as she admitted to the poisoning, the affair, and the insurance fraud. The crowd listened in stunned silence, then erupted in angry shouts and accusations. Leah appeared in the doorway, looking like something from a horror movie. Her dress was soaked with sweat, her hair was a tangled mess, and she was covered in red welts from the itching powder. The smell that followed her out of the room made several people in the crowd gag and step back. "You did this to me," she said, her voice hoarse. "You destroyed my life." "No, Leah, you destroyed your own life when you decided to become a murderer. I just made sure everyone knew about it." She tried to push through the crowd, but people stepped aside like she was contagious. Someone shouted, "Murderer," and others took up the chant. Leah ran to her car, fumbling with the keys while the crowd jeered and took photos. As she drove away, tires squealing in her desperation to escape, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced since this whole nightmare began. The woman who'd tried to murder me was now exactly what she deserved to be, a social pariah with no job, no boyfriend, no friends, and no future in this town. But I still had one more surprise for her. 3 days after the motel incident, I was in my workshop when I heard a car pull into our driveway. I looked out the window to see Leah getting out of her sister's Honda, moving slowly like someone who'd aged a decade in the past week. She looked around at our house. Her house, technically, since her name was still on the deed, with the expression of someone visiting a grave. I'd been expecting this visit. It was the final move in a chess game that had been inevitable since the moment I'd switched those wine glasses. Leah had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to, and she was about to discover just how thoroughly I'd dismantled the life she'd tried to steal from me. She knocked on the front door like a stranger, which I suppose she was now. When I opened it, I barely recognized the woman standing on my doorstep. The confident, polished project manager who'd tried to poison me was gone, replaced by someone hollow and desperate. "Hello, Will." "Leah, what can I do for you?" "Can I come in? Please, I just need to get some of my things." I stepped aside and let her enter. The house felt different with her in it, like a museum where someone had accidentally let in a vandal. She moved through the room slowly, touching familiar objects with the reverence of someone saying goodbye. "I've been staying with my sister," she said, not looking at me. "But that's not working out. She's seen the videos from the motel. Everyone has. I can't go anywhere in this town without people staring, whispering." "That must be difficult." She turned to face me, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. "Will, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is there any way at all, that we can work through this? I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but—" "No." The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Leah's face crumpled, and she sat down heavily on our couch. The same couch where she'd confronted me about Grant, where she'd admitted to 8 months of betrayal. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "My job, my friends, my reputation. Grant won't return my calls. Even my own sister can barely stand to look at me. You're all I have left." "You tried to murder me, Leah. You planned my death in detail, researched the best way to make it look like an accident, and actually attempted to poison me. There's no coming back from that. But I didn't go through with it. When it came down to it, I couldn't—" "You couldn't because I switched the glasses. If I hadn't, I'd be dead right now, and you'd be playing the grieving widow while you ran off with your boyfriend and my insurance money." She was crying again, the ugly, desperate tears of someone who'd finally realized the full extent of their losses. "What am I supposed to do now? I can't get a job anywhere. Everyone knows what I did. I can't stay in this town, but I don't have money to move. I have nothing, Will, nothing." "You have exactly what you deserve." I walked to the kitchen and returned with a manila envelope, which I handed to her. Inside were divorce papers, already filed and processed. Margaret Walsh had expedited everything, and given the evidence against Leah, the settlement was exactly what I'd hoped for. You're getting nothing, I said as she read through the documents. No alimony, no property settlement, no claim on my pension or savings. The house is mine, the cars are mine, everything we built together is mine. You'll leave this marriage with exactly what you brought to it 15 years ago. This isn't legal, she said, her voice shaking. I'm entitled to half of everything. Not when you're convicted of attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Margaret Walsh is very good at her job, and the evidence against you is overwhelming. You can fight it if you want, but you'll lose, and it'll cost you money you don't have for lawyers you can't afford. Leah stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Convicted? Will, you can't seriously be planning to press charges. I already have. The district attorney is very interested in your case. Apparently, attempted spousal murder is taken quite seriously by the legal system. Who knew? The color drained from her face. How long? Margaret thinks you're looking at 10 to 15 years, assuming you take a plea deal. If you go to trial and lose, it could be 25 to life. She doubled over like I'd punched her in the stomach, making choking sounds that might have been sobs or might have been her trying not to vomit. When she finally looked up, her face was streaked with tears and snot, and her carefully applied makeup was completely ruined. Please, she whispered. Will, please. I'll do anything. I'll disappear, leave town, never contact you again. Just don't send me to prison, please. I looked down at the woman who'd shared my bed for 15 years, who'd promised to love and honor me until death do us part, who'd tried to make that death come a lot sooner than either of us had planned. I felt nothing. No love, no hate, no pity, no regret. She'd become a stranger to me the moment I'd read those text messages, and strangers' problems weren't my concern. You should have thought about that before you tried to poison me. The sound she made wasn't quite human, a wail of despair and terror that filled our living room and echoed off the walls where we'd once hung wedding photos and anniversary gifts. She collapsed onto the floor, curled into a ball, and sobbed like a broken child. I stepped over her and walked to the front door, which I opened wide. You need to leave now, Leah. This isn't your home anymore. She pulled herself together enough to stand, clutching the divorce papers like a lifeline. At the door, she turned back one last time, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married. Young, hopeful, full of dreams about our future together. I loved you, she said. I know you don't believe that now, but I did love you. I still do. No, you didn't. You loved the idea of me, the security I provided, the life I built for you, but you never loved me enough to talk to me about your problems, or to ask for help when you were struggling, or to choose me over a con man who saw you as just another mark. Real love doesn't come with poison, Leah. She nodded like she understood, then walked to her car without looking back. I watched her drive away, probably for the last time, and felt the same sense of completion I'd experienced at the motel. The woman who'd tried to murder me was gone, and the life I'd thought we were building together was officially over. But I wasn't finished yet. That evening, I drove to the dockside bar, where Eddie was waiting with a beer and a grin. The place was packed with the usual crowd of construction workers, retirees, and townspeople looking to unwind after a long day. Conversation stopped when I walked in, and I could feel eyes following me to the bar. Well, well, said Tom Fletcher, the bartender who'd been serving drinks at the dockside for 20 years. If it isn't our local hero, heard you finally took out the trash. Something like that, I said, accepting the beer Eddie handed me, though I prefer to think of it as pest control. The crowd laughed, and I realized that my war against Leah and Grant had made me something of a folk hero in our small town. People respected a man who fought back, who didn't just roll over and accept betrayal. I'd become living proof that the good guys could win if they were smart enough and ruthless enough. So what's next? Eddie asked. Leah's gone, Grant's gone, and you've got your life back. Time to start over? I'm thinking about it. Maybe travel for a while, see some places Leah never wanted to visit, maybe sell the house and start fresh somewhere new, or maybe I'll stay right here and enjoy watching people remember what happens when you cross Will Mercer. As if summoned by my words, the bar's front door opened and Mandy Sparks walked in. Leah's former best friend and co-conspirator looked around nervously, spotted me at the bar, and walked over with the determined stride of someone who'd been building up courage all day. Will, I need to talk to you. I'm listening. I want you to know that I had no idea what Leah was planning. The affair, yes, I knew about that, and I'm ashamed I didn't try to stop it. But the poison, the insurance money, the murder plot, I swear I didn't know anything about that. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Mandy had always been a terrible liar, and right now she looked genuinely terrified. What did you know? I knew she was unhappy. I knew she was having an affair with Grant. I even helped cover for her a few times when she needed alibis for their meetings, but I thought it was just a midlife crisis thing, you know? I never imagined she'd try to hurt you. You helped her lie to me for 8 months. I know, and I'm sorry. I thought I was being a good friend, but I see now that I was just enabling her to destroy your marriage. I lost my job too, you know. The company fired me for my role in covering up the affair. My husband's talking about divorce. My kids won't speak to me. She was crying now, but unlike Leah's manipulative tears, these seemed genuine. Mandy had been stupid and disloyal, but she wasn't evil. She'd been used by Leah the same way Leah had been used by Grant, a chain of manipulation and betrayal that had destroyed multiple families. I'm sorry for what happened to you, Mandy, but you made your choices. I know. I just wanted you to know that if there's anything I can do to help with the legal case against Leah, any testimony you need, I'll cooperate fully. She tried to murder you, Will. That's unforgivable. I nodded, accepting her offer. Mandy's testimony would help ensure that Leah faced the full consequences of her actions, and that was important to me. Not for revenge, I'd already gotten my revenge, but for justice. As Mandy left the bar, probably to face her own ruined life, I raised my beer in a silent toast. To justice, to survival, and to the hard-learned lesson that sometimes the people closest to you are the most dangerous enemies of all. The bar's atmosphere gradually returned to normal, conversations resuming, laughter filling the air. But I remained at the center of it all. The man who'd fought back and won, who'd turned the tables on his would-be murderer and made her pay the ultimate price. Eddie clapped me on the shoulder. So, what's the final score? I thought about it for a moment. Leah loses her job, her reputation, her marriage, her freedom, and probably the next 15 years of her life. Grant loses his con game, his money, his credibility, and has to start over in a new town with new victims who don't know his history yet. Mandy loses her job, her marriage, and her kids' respect. And you? I lose a wife who tried to murder me and gain the satisfaction of knowing that justice was served. I'd call that a win. As the evening wore on and the crowd at the dockside grew louder and more celebratory, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a trusting husband who thought he had a solid marriage and a secure future. Tonight, I was a widower in all but name, a man who'd learned that survival sometimes requires becoming someone you never thought you could be. Leah had toasted to us forever on the night she tried to poison me. She'd been right about the forever part. I would never forget what she'd done, and neither would anyone else in our small town. Her betrayal would be her legacy, the thing people remembered about her long after she was gone. As for me, I'd learned something valuable about the nature of justice and revenge. Sometimes the legal system isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take matters into your own hands, not with violence or illegal acts, but with intelligence, patience, and the willingness to expose the truth no matter how ugly it might be. I finished my beer, said goodbye to Eddie and the other regulars, and drove home to my empty house. Tomorrow I would start the process of rebuilding my life, but tonight I was content to savor the completeness of my victory. Leah had wanted to play games with poison and murder. She'd discovered, too late, that I was better at games than she'd ever imagined.